Hello, everyone. I am Pablo Tomasi from Omdia, and today I'm joined in a fireside chat by James Weaver from Ericsson Enterprise Wireless. James, welcome to this chat.
Hey, thanks, Pablo. Great to be here.
So today we're going to talk about private 5G. And for those of you that don't really know what a private 5G network is a cellular-based network, a 4G or 5G that is fully dedicated to an enterprise. So it has dedicated RAN and dedicated core and can be used to provide high-performance connectivity to the enterprise. Now, I know you guys have been active in this market for quite a few years, and what I want to know from you is whether, based on your experience and your activities, have you found any common theme or common triggers among different verticals for enterprises that want to deploy a private 5G network?
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant question, and it has a very interesting answer. I think that's a little different than other industries. There's really a recipe or a formula that just seems to play out, and that is two things. First, the value of the use case, and that is if this use case or this application goes down, it stops operations, it stops things, it costs the company a lot of money. That's kind of the first piece. And the second piece is the difficulty of the connectivity. And so where those two intersect is where the great opportunities occur. So you have to have high value use case, difficult connectivity, they intersect, perfect setup for private 5G. Now, if one of those aren't in there, then you have some discussions, right? But when we find that we have those two things, it just really, really works out. And the growth kind of happens in those two areas, or we're seeing the growth. And these high value use cases are emerging more. This concept of Industry 4.0 we've been talking about for a long time is really starting to come about with AI and edge compute and this real-time access to data that's really expected. And so we're seeing more of these high value use cases. And then we're also seeing companies being more maybe brave. And they're going into areas they haven't done it before. They're trying to differentiate their services between them and their competitors. And so both of those elements of the formula are growing, which I think is good for our industry.
That sounds very promising. And you mentioned data, and I had the opportunity a couple of months back to go to the SailGP Tech Tour in Saint-Tropez. And, the amount of data that was generated, the amount of sensors on the catamaran, on the sail, there was like 124 sensors just for the sail. I think that's really interesting because often we're not thinking of how much data is actually generated in a site. And that's where private 5G can really help, I think. But if we then move, we have set the scene, right? We understand these are the two ingredients that we need to have that, easier conversation. But we know that this is a vertical market and we know that this is a very specific market. So my next question for you is whether, based on your deployments, do you have any specific results or specific KPIs that the enterprise was able to achieve thanks to the private 5G deployment?
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's something we're always asking our customers. And, sometimes they measure and sometimes they don't. Sometimes there's like, yeah, it's better. We're good. And we kind of scratch our head and say, well, I wish you'd tell us how good. But we do have a number of them. And there is one in particular that is just kind of a poster child for what we're doing. And it's a cargo company that's out of LAX airport in Los Angeles, California. And it's one of the biggest cargo companies in the world, and they live and die by the ability to use their barcode scanners. And they had connectivity issues where they'd have to reboot the scanner itself, which was now 3 to 5 minutes, or they'd have to bring paper copies, and it just was problematic for them. And so, they implemented a POC phase, no downtime. That was good. They then gave the thumbs up to say, hey, we're going to production. And they estimate that they've probably got a 70 to 80% increase in efficiency. And those are pretty big numbers. We usually don't see that big of numbers. We see numbers in the from like 15% to 30, but 70 to 80% is what they're showing. And that's, you'd think, hey, that's just scanners, nothing, there's no robots or anything. That's big for them, right? That's what their business is. So that's probably our, you just really clear cut case. There are also other, very different verticals like mines, where we're showing, 20% lower cost to Wi-Fi. After, because the areas are so big, and once you take into account how many radios versus how many access points, it's actually cheaper. 20% lower total cost of ownership. And then another fun one on a mine is 50% boost in remote bulldozing capacity. so, so that's really getting into it. And then they just saw some, like one of them saw, performance boosts of, 370 megabits per second uplink at 500 plus meters. So in a mine that, those metrics really make sense. And then we see some other logistic companies who see, again, I think I mentioned 20, 40%, differences. We have a material handling company that saw a 40% reduction in overtime. So that's good for them as well. And that one, they implemented both private 5G as well as neutral host.
And I think it's fascinating because so you mentioned very different use case, right? The scanners and the bulldozing, and what sort of captured my attention is the fact that even if from an outside perspective we may think, well, that use case is not so exciting. Well, it doesn't have to be exciting; it has to be critical for them, right?
Right,
So
that's
as
right.
you were mentioning in the scanner, use case, they live and die on how that performs. So that is critical for them, and having that so much better increase in the performance, I think, is absolutely fantastic for them. But that sort of brings me to my next question, if you want, in a kind of natural flow. So, of course, no one wins alone in this type of market. There are a lot of different moving pieces, a lot of different technologies. And what I'm curious is to know from your side, how can you work with an ecosystem to achieve those very specific results? And is there any secret ingredient to create what I like to call as a successful partnership for this market, particularly thinking about long term?
We have, this is an emerging market. And, the second piece of it is a little bit of the history, where at first you had kind of the vendors like Ericsson going out and looking for opportunities. Hey, we have a solution, looking for a use case. Right? And then you had these vendors like, hey, we have a use case, but we can't run them as well. And that was kind of the start of this business. And that's why I think there were so many kind of POCs and so forth. But then what happened is that we started to get real implementations, and we started to really learn from each other. And that started to bring this ecosystem and vendors together. And then we started to showcase at events and shows, and we started to talk about it. And all of a sudden, hey, we start to kind of refer to each other. But what we're seeing now, and we have one, we just a very large global integrator that we just formed a relationship with. Now we're starting to see some planning, which is, okay, what are your expertise areas for use cases? What are the verticals that we see that's best? Let's look at our ideal customer profiles. Let's put them together, and then let's start to go to customers with kind of a joint proposition. And so that's what we're starting to see now, and that's a little bit new, as you can imagine. We're also starting to see relationships with non-integrators. So, for instance, we had a firm that makes mobile hand tools. They actually have, it's automated socket, and they can register how much the torque is, and actually spatially where it's at. And so we started to kind of jointly develop and say, all right, what happens if we make this a little easier for the customer so that it becomes integrated, from the start. And you can think of companies like Rockwell and so forth, that just makes sense to do that kind of thing. So that's where we're at right now is starting that journey. And I think where it's going to go is we'll see more and more practices that almost look like it's a joint venture. It doesn't have to be a joint venture, but it's looking like one, where we're coming into customers with really a solution that makes them work a lot less harder to get what they want.
And that's great to hear. I mean, in Omdia, we like to say, we're connecting the dots, and it seems that's what's happening in the private 5G ecosystem as well to drive the solutions. So one last question for you, as I know sort of time is running out quite quickly, but is there one last customer story that you would like to highlight? Something that sort of maybe is particularly interesting for you, or is kind of wrap up a little bit what we have discussed so far?
Well, I'll just reference the fact that we mentioned Cell GP, and I think you had the chance to go to that event. That's a pretty cool place with lots of catamarans going almost 100 kilometers an hour, and it works. It works there. But I'll mention another one that is kind of interesting. It brings a lot of these kind of advanced use cases, and that's Hitachi Rail, where they are actually using these autonomous robots. In this case, spot the dog, right? And that's been fun to watch for a while, to see that dog kind of move around and stuff. But we've seen them at trade shows. But they actually attach now computer vision, and now it has a real job. The dog is finally employed, right? It's now walking into these rail cars that have just been manufactured, and it is scanning them for defects at the manufacturing site, which they program them on missions, and it just does it and can catch things that normally the human eye maybe would look over, and can use heat sensing and things like that. And then they're also having the same kind of application at these shunt yards, where the trains pull in, and they're walking around inspecting for cracks and for loose hoses and things like that. That now becomes a safety factor, where you can do it more repetitively and more often without putting a human life in the way. And so it's really fun to see something that was kind of a novelty at first to now actually having a job and doing something. And that's creating a lot of this, I know you talk about a lot of this kind of real-time data analytics that companies use, and the edge compute. And so we're really seeing this come to bear, where these high, data intensive applications are actually going and working. And so that's great to see the industry advance that way.
Amazing. James, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us today.
All right. Great to be with you, Pablo.